1st, we intend to begin submarine warfare without restriction. In spite of this, it is our intention to endeavor to keep the United States neutral. If this attempt is not successful, we propose an alliance on the following basis with Mexico: that we shall make war together and together make peace. We shall give general financial support, and it is understood that Mexico is to reconquer her lost territory of New Mexico, Texas, and Arizona. The details are left to you for settlement. You are instructed to inform the President of Mexico of the above in the greatest confidence. As soon as it is certain that there will be an outbreak of war with the United States, and suggest that the President of Mexico shall, on his own initiative, communicate with Japan, suggesting the latter's adherence at once to this plan, and at the same time to offer to mediate between Germany and Japan. Please call to the attention of the President of Mexico that the employment of the ruthless submarine warfare now promises to compel England to make peace in a few months. Zimmerman Telegram, 17 January 1917. If you are, say, a person who likes to make internet videos about how the past and the present are in a constant rinse and repeat cycle, now is a great time to be alive and kicking. Rather than constantly looking for something to write about, the problem is rather on the opposite end of the spectrum. So much happens so often that episodes of History She Wrote can't keep up. And as a certain scandal involving sensitive discussion on an unsecure and yet also official channel gets more attention, World War I comes more and more to mind. And not just a single World War I episode, but rather problems that were repeated again and again, with sometimes absolutely devastating consequences. Take, for example, the Battle of Tannenberg, the very beginning of the war, which was fought between Russia and Germany in 1914. If all had gone according to plan, Russia's numerical superiority would have greatly aided a victory when it invaded Prussia. And although the problems were much greater than merely issues with communication, it was an unencoded communication which enabled the Germans to pursue a strategy that led to victory. But it wasn't just one unencoded communication. The codes used by different Russian military units were all different. Faced with the problem of incomprehensible secure communications, the Russians just began communicating via clear and unencoded messages. Anyone with a few moments to listen would be rewarded with Russian battle plans. As shocking as that behavior might be, it was the Germans who next fumbled the communications game in their initial Schleifenplan advance towards Paris. Outrunning the range of their wireless systems, the army began transmitting in the clear. It was an honest decision. When the time to encode and decode messages was taken into account, it meant that plans issued by the German High Command were being made on obsolete information. Reports had to be gotten to headquarters more quickly. To save time, corners were cut in encoding. And the French and British were able to listen in real time. Instantaneous communications in wartime were an entirely new development in 1914. But as early as 1858, the British were intercepting Russian telegrams traveling through Persia and India. This was a little easier for the Queen's Empire to manage, as the vast majority of telegraph wires was owned by the Brits and often paid for by the City of London. The infrastructure crossing oceans and continents gave London a decided advantage in financial trading. Other nations could use Britain's cables, but it was Britain whose messages took precedence over all else. And it was Britain who was able to listen in. But by 1914, times they were a-changing. It no longer required physical cables to send messages, although those sent the old way were more secure and more clear. Communication could be done through the air. Wireless radios had longer and longer transmission distances, which meant that the British wire monopoly could be bypassed. Although everyone was still listening. In fact, the French were the 1914 masters of wireless eavesdropping with their flagship relay station atop the Eiffel Tower. The Germans, determined to build up their own communications network, began putting relay stations all across the globe, in Africa, on Pacific Islands, and with an enormous transmitter in Germany itself. It was through this system that the Kaiser's government began warning dispersed German merchants, army, and navy that war was imminent. A wire sent on July 26, 1914, updated commanders that the Russian army was mobilizing. Another sent on 30 July told ship commanders not to enter Russian, French, or British harbors. On August 2nd, the day after Germany declared war on Russia, a wireless message sent out instructed the following: send regularly by wireless short messages on the political situation. The big wireless here is open for messages night and day. Anyone who has ever attempted to buy toothpaste on a Sunday in Germany will immediately recognize how dire a situation must be for 24/7 open hours. The British were intercepting all these messages, and unbeknownst to the Germans, had made quite good headway in deciphering the codes. To balance the flow of information out, Germany, Britain, and even the neutral Danes all made wireless sets owned by civilians illegal. Germany went further and forbade any language but German on the telephone lines. Everyone made encoded telegrams illegal, which may sound obvious on the face, but had the unintended side effect of stomping down on businesses who used encoding to protect their trade secrets. And here, Britain discovered an absolutely massive dilemma. As the owner of the majority of communications cables under the Atlantic, Britain had to decide how to deal with wired communications of their enemy Germany to the Americas and outside of Europe. Cutting Germany off completely meant losing access to the vast possibilities of intelligence from German telegraphs. On the other hand, allowing the communications meant that Britain might be participating in attacks on itself. Cables were allowed, but they were given low priority. Often messages would end up with the British government before the ambassadors meant to receive them even knew they were coming. More than once, the Germans bypassed this whole issue by transmitting messages to Britain in the clear, rather than through their ambassador. They got to their intended destination more quickly that way. Germany did have some of its own cable in the Atlantic, and the British immediately got to work cutting those lines wherever they could. In more than one instance, they didn't just cut the cable, they pulled it up and reused the line in their own equipment. In a report issued by the British General Post Office, the effect of the expedition was to interrupt entirely all communications between Germany and overseas countries, except Norway and Sweden, by direct cable. Entente troops were also targeting German wireless stations. The first shots fired by a British soldier in World War I were actually fired in Togo in Africa, as the wireless station in Kamina was besieged and captured. Before the capture, however, the Germans managed to destroy the station in accordance with their orders, to deny the Entente the ability to use German infrastructure for themselves. This pattern was repeated throughout the Pacific as well. Perhaps the most famous communications intelligence gleaned during World War I was the infamous telegram that brought Americans into the war in 1917, the Zimmerman Note. The message, which I read at the beginning of this episode, promised territory in the U.S. Southwest to Mexico for joining the war in alliance with Germany against the U.S. When the British handed the message off to the Americans, it changed everything. The American president, Woodrow Wilson, had spent the majority of the war in a state of high irritation against the British, and often acting quite approachably to Germany with peace overtures. German behavior was often excused, and there were even warnings noised about that European powers could not expect a peace in which Germany did not get to keep some of the territory it had gained in the fighting. Again, does this sound familiar to anyone watching the news today, perhaps? Humans only have a limited number of scripts, after all. But with the Zimmerman Note, that all changed. Germany's intentions could not have been made more clear. At first, many Americans refused to believe it. William Randolph Hearst trumpeted the sounds of conspiracy throughout his news conglomerate. But that ended when the German Foreign Minister, Arthur Zimmermann, actually admitted that he had written the note. And he meant it. He had already fomented rebellion in Ireland and had been a part of the decision to send Lenin into Russia to effect revolution there and remove the bear from the war. Bringing Mexico into the war against the United States, which was a massive threat to Germany, was just sound politics in Zimmerman's mind. Did not work out as actually intended, however. When World War I began in 1914 and wireless radio was still very new, there was no shortage of people willing to ignore laws about private wireless sets for reasons nefarious, patriotic, and everything in between. Even with private radio sets being confiscated, some folks managed to skirt the law or outright ignore it. Amateur radio operators in the UK would pick up German messages, record them, and even if they couldn't decipher the messages themselves, forward what they managed to record to the Royal Navy. There was a wealth of information in the huge stack of papers, but no way to access it in a timely manner. By 1918 and the end of the war, with the encouragement of the Lord of the Admiralty, a man you might know of named Winston Churchill, the Cryptography Center of British Intelligence was well and truly established. And it paved the way for the accomplishments of Bletchley Park in World War II. Churchill would return, of course, and encourage yet another intelligence triumph of bravery and skill when Britain again faced off with Germany in World War II. The Special Operations Executive, which was tasked with and succeeded in setting Europe ablaze. In one final story connecting the two great wars through cryptography, we come to America's most celebrated group of communications personnel, the Code Talkers. As Major Howard Connor stated about their role in World War II, were it not for the Navajo, the Marines would never have taken Iwo Jima. The Navajo language code remains today the only military code which was never broken. The Code Talkers of World War II deserve every accolade that they've been given, but they were not the first. At the Battle of the Somme in 1918, Cherokee code talkers were used. And at the Meuse-Argonne Offensive, Choctaw code talkers were credited with turning the tide of the battle. Their effect was so pronounced that in the interim time between the two world wars, Germany actually sent a group of anthropologists to the United States specifically to study Native American languages. It was a trick they wanted to be good and ready for when the war Germany was pushing towards finally arrived. And that's the reason that Native American code talkers in the Second World War were mainly reserved for use in the Pacific theater. In 2025, everything old is new again. And truthfully, this is the way cycles of history work. There's never an exact repeat, but it's usually close enough that by studying the past, we can be reasonably sure to predict and direct the future. Phone apps and wireless radios may seem completely different, but human behavior is not. And someone, somewhere, somehow, is always listening.
What to do